right, welcome back into another episode of the Idea Collision. My name is Andrew Green. We are exploring ideas and events, things that dovetail with spirituality, but even though at the first glance they might not necessarily look like they do. And we are going to be continuing our look at recent history, I guess recent being the last 120 years. Last week, and if you didn't get a chance to look at that, I would encourage you to go back and look at that podcast. It was podcast 2, and we're continuing that basic theme. We're looking at, last week we looked at how we got, beginning from the silent generation, how we got generation by generation to where we're at in terms of how the various events that these generations went through, how they affected the family and has ended up impacting the societal, I guess, movements that we've had, various rebellions and all sorts of different things that have happened as one generation has shaped the next generation in their ideals through their reactions to their experiences. We're going to start from the same generation, but we are not going to look generation by generation. In other words, because what we're looking at today is philosophical in nature, philosophies take a little bit longer to develop, and they're more fluid. They don't, one generation doesn't have a distinct philosophy necessarily over the next. And so we're going to back up and look at, strangely enough, we're going to look at artwork, a development in art criticism. You say, what in the world does that have to do with spirituality? Well, strangely enough, it does. In the late 1800s, there was a movement. Now, the late 1800s, as we said, this is the silent generation. These are the people that will go off to war in World War I. And so many of them were artists and various things like that. And what happened on, I guess, college campuses, I assume that's where a lot of movements start. But what happened was they were tired of artwork the way it was. And something happens, and this is fine because it's just artwork, and who cares? But until this point in time, every piece of art that had ever been, or virtually every piece of art that had ever been created, was what we call realism. Realism just states, here's an apple. Okay, I like this apple. I'm going to paint a picture of it. And I want you to like the picture of this apple. In other cases, realism would tell a story. Here's a picture of some traumatic event in history, or here's an expression of this event, and I want you to kind of feel what it's like to be in this event. And that was all art, comprised realism, some aspect of realism. And in the late 1800s, someone somewhere decided, we don't like this art, because art asked one question: what is the painter trying to say to me? And they said, I'm not interested in that anymore. I don't want to be confined by what the painter is trying to say to me. And so they said, well, we want something that's not realism. We want something that's a little bit more modern. And so they came up with what's called modern art. They named it modern art. Okay. And modern art was, Pablo Picasso and various ones like that. And it asked a different question. They said, what does this say to me? What does this mean to me, was the question that the modernists asked. And they were no longer interested in what the painter thought. It's what I feel or what I think. And so they interpreted art this way. Well, who cares? It's just art. No one cares. There's no real implications. But the problem was that this art criticism didn't stay where it was put. Art criticism became a philosophy. And so what happened with this philosophy is that they started to apply this to other areas, whether it be politics, or philosophy, morality, spirituality, various things like that. And so these questions invaded all of these other areas. So, for example, in politics, and again, this is not a political thing, but it impacted. We hear statements like, we used to hear statements like, well, what was the founder's intent? Well, there's no longer a care for the founder's intent. You'll hear phrases like, well, the Constitution is a living, breathing document. And that's supposed to sound profound, but what it's really saying is, we don't care what the founders thought. We live now in this modern time, and we're going to make it say what we want it to say. So a judge can just get up there and say, I don't care. We're going to reinterpret it to reflect our values, right? So this affected all sorts of areas, morality. Well, do I really care what God was trying to say to me? You'll hear people say things like, this is my truth. My truth. Well, there's truth or there's not truth, really. And we could give a lot of evidences for that. But this is really one of the avenues that was affected by this group of people. And so they didn't they were just very modern. So we said, well, we have to have a modern interpretation of all these things. How is this making me feel? And if I don't like what the realists said, the interpretation of the Constitution, the interpretation of the Bible, the interpretation of anything, then I'm just going to reinterpret it to match my subjective feelings. And this is one of those things that the phrases, and any time something gets rebranded, you should really be cautious of it. Because what it means is an idea is so bad that it didn't catch on. We have to keep giving it new phrases. So modernism has been called relativism. It's been called subjective morality or situation ethics. All these different people will talk about nuance, right? Or things being non-binary, and I know non-binary has one specific application in our terminology today, but it is a form of modernism, which just states, there's not black and white. There's a lot of different things that are equally relevant and adequate. Any number of things, and we should take them all as equally valuable. We don't like the right and wrong. And so in artwork suffered because of this. Artwork said, we're done. We want Pablo Picasso's and all that. And so artwork, probably the last realist painter was someone by the name of Norman Rockwell. I mean, last really influential, famous. And if you look at a Norman Rockwell, you can see every time you see a Norman Rockwell piece of art, you're going to be having an interpretation. You're going to laugh because of something funny that it resonates with you. You're going to get frustrated because you see something. Whatever the case is, you're going to immediately understand what it was Norman Rockwell was trying to portray, an emotion, an idea, whatever it was. So those fall by the wayside in terms of that types of artists. Not that there's never been realist painters since then, but just not really influential, popular ones. So the next thing that happens, a couple generations, probably the late 50s and the 60s, again on college campuses, what happened was the next generations of people realized that this was hypocritical. A painting or a piece of literature can only have meaning if it was given a meaning. We immediately recognize that. So they said, what? That's ridiculous to say. What does it mean to me? And so there was a new movement that says we're not going to care about meaning at all. We're going to, if we don't like it, we're going to throw it out, and we're going to say that there's no meaning. We're not going to try to justify not interpreting it the way it was originally. We're just going to say we don't care. It's different. And so this became what we call postmodernism. Well, again, it begins with art. If you look at postmodern art, Andy Warhol and various things like that, art, what we call abstract art, is a different type of a different type of postmodernism, where it just has no meaning. I'm going to have fun. And again, in artwork, who cares? This is it's artwork. I have a daughter who likes art, and she likes to paint abstract art. It's postmodern art that she likes, and it's fun. It's you don't have to have what? You don't have to have lines. You don't have to have rules. You don't have to have form. You just express all over a canvas, right? And hopefully you sell paintings that way. I have two pieces of art behind me. One was, I don't know if my wife, the one here on my left, but this picture here is the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I don't know if she actually did that or found it and framed it. And the other one by my oldest son. And so the one on here it's an idea, and I'm not sure if you can catch the idea, but I like things very orderly. I don't like things out of line. I will adjust a centimeter. I just, I don't know if I'm really OCD or if I just have pretend OCD, but I like things in straight lines, and it really bugs me when they're not. So she got this and gave me the option. I can have it hung so that the Leaning Tower of Pisa is crooked, and that would be the right way because my frame would be right up upside and down, and perpendicular to the floor. Or I could have the frame off kilter, but at least my Leaning Tower of Pisa would be straight up and down, which is the way it should be. So, kind of a difficult choice for me. And so it's kind of a joke. But if you look at that, you get the joke. There was an intent. The creator of this particular art piece had an intent in that. And as soon as I opened it, and I saw the way it was hung, I got the joke. Now over here, my oldest son spray painted this piece of artwork, and it's kind of probably more modern. It kind of looks a little like grass and some sun and starish kind of things going on here, but it's open for interpretation what that is. Maybe a little abstract, I don't know. But you can see kind of, I guess, how different generations think of things and look at things and appreciate things. And as long as it's artwork, it's fine. But unfortunately, the postmodernism didn't stay here in artwork. It pushed on into philosophy, and we now live in a postmodern world. I saw, I think it was a Popular Science or Popular Mechanics, I can't remember which one, article, and the guy was trying to rationalize 2 + 2 does equal 5, because every realist says 2 + 2 is 4. And this is kind of the realist motto. Is black and white. There's it's yes or no, and we who are realists like that. There are different applications of things that apply differently, but the truth is the same truth underneath those different applications. But this moved through. Well, I want this to mean something to me, and then we come to a generation that says, I don't care. I'm not even going to try to rationalize or justify. I'm just going to do what I want to do. If I want your property, I'll take it. I'm not going to try to rationalize it. I'm just going to take it. Whatever I'm going to do, I'm just going to do. We don't care about your rules. And this was the 60s generation that where this really made this transition to away from postmodernism, where people tried to rationalize their poor behavior. Now we're not even going to try to rationalize it. We're just going to do what we want. And you realists and modernists need to shut up. And so we don't care at all about the Constitution. We don't care about the original intent of anything, but we go beyond the modernists in that we don't care what they wrote. And so this works into religion, where people say, I know God says that. I just don't care. I like this part. This is okay. This is acceptable part of the Bible or what have you. But over here, I'm just going to ignore this because it doesn't seem like something I want to do. And so we're faced with a crisis now of spirituality, and it is something that is impacting the world around us, because we're now living in a world where everything is questioned. Things that we didn't think could be questioned are now being questioned. And I kind of alluded to this in the last session where we talked about how people are questioning even basic things like their gender, things that are a part of your basic identity. Everything is being questioned. Why? It's because of this movement that began, 60, 70 years ago, called postmodernism, which is just a funny word in and of itself. Postmodernism is, well, if you've the generations before them thought that they had arrived at the final philosophy, and so that was modern. This is modern. This is all there is going to be. They didn't think about, what if a new philosophy comes along? What are we going to call that? And so I guess it's what comes after what is modern. So it's postmodern, but there's really no such thing. I mean, every generation is a modern generation. So really, postmodern doesn't make any sense. But there was nothing else to call it. So it's postmodern, and this too gets rebranded. But we have to establish, and I'm probably going to do this in the next blog or podcast rather, that the idea of truth has to exist, and don't really have time to get into all of that today, but I want you to kind of, as you interact with people, start from today, wherever you're at, and notice how these, you can find, is this person a modernist, a realist, or a postmodernist? You can kind of get the feel of which one. Do they try to have moral behavior but rationalize away certain, do they rationalize their modernists? But if they just ignore, then they're postmodernists. If they just, I'm going to get away with this because I don't care. I'm going to do this because I don't care. That's postmodernism. And that is ultimately destructive for any society. When you get a group of people that simply don't care about rules, they're going to do what they want. Then you will get a group of people, like anything, our leaders are elected from among the people. And so the leaders will have this philosophy. And so we'll have a society where rules don't make a difference. We'll do what we want. And churches will decide, and preachers will decide, because preachers are taken from among the peer group of the church. And so preachers will decide, you know what, here's this Bible verse, but it's inconvenient for me to preach. I just don't care. And that kind of goes back to that same idea. This is not a new thing. Solomon said, one generation arises and departs, and really nothing ever changes. This is not a new thing. We've rebranded it, but this has cycled before. There have been a lot of generations, and you can even go back in the Bible and look at Bible history and see how groups of people rationalized things. They were their era's modernists, and then it moved into a generation where people completely didn't care about rules at all, and the society broke down, and all sorts of awful things happen. And so when you see awful things happening, just recognize that that is a natural side effect of the postmodernism in which we live in. Now, if you are a person that you want the postmodernism for you want the lack of people interfering. You do not have the right to tell me what to do. And you'll hear that phrase. That's a postmodern thought. You don't have the right to tell me what to do. Well, postmodernism suffers here because postmodernism, if it's true that I don't have the right to tell you what to do, okay, then it's equally true that you don't have the right to tell me that I don't have the right to tell you what to do. See, that cuts both ways. Why do you have the right to tell me what I have the right to do if postmodernism truly exists? It's a self-defeating philosophy, and that's why societies, really are ruined in this under the influence of postmodernism, not just now, but in any era in which it's been tried, because there is no standard by which society will function. Because the masses of people will not accept the standard, and they will live as they want. This is how old this is. One of the statements in the Bible, one of the early statements in the Bible, is that this is very early in the book of Genesis, in the story of the flood. And again, you might come to this from a perspective of not really believing the Bible. You might really believe the Bible, and then you'll recognize this, and you'll say, "Wow, that's." But either way, you can see that this has existed before in mankind. I believe the flood story, and here's the observation of humanity. He says that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It was completely a postmodern society, and God said we can't exist. This society cannot exist any longer. Now, God doesn't destroy every generation that arises with postmodernism, but the reality is that every generation will destroy itself with postmodernism. We will all suffer the consequences. Our science will break down. Our understanding of everything will break down, simply because we refuse to acknowledge facts and truth. And once that happens, no organized structure can be applied to anything. So I want you to go out and not just observe other people, but observe when you say things, and notice where those things come from. Notice that people will say, "I feel." We used to say, "I think." We say, "I feel" now. What is that? It's kind of this. It's somewhere between modernism and postmodernism. It's this, self-centric view of the world. It's what I want, and so I'm going to do. I don't care about other things. Notice what you say that. I feel. Well, I feel that's wrong. Something is true or not true, and we process these things through observation and through our intellect. And so even our very language is showing these kind of the effects of the final stages of postmodernism. And where we go from here, I don't know. But it begins with a person saying, this might be inconvenient for me, but this is reality. And then the more people who accept reality, then we can reverse postmodernism's effect, and we can see a generation, if we instill truth and reality, then we can see a generation arise that kind of brings us back from, at least from the edge where I think we are right now. So go out there, investigate yourself, notice these trends in others, and hopefully make a change if that's what you need to do. And in the meantime, I always ask, if you are influenced by this, if this kind of makes you think at all, share it with somebody and subscribe to the podcast, or encourage them to subscribe. We are, depending on how you're listening to this or watching it, we have both. You can catch us at the Waukesha Church of Christ YouTube channel. You can, if you're watching this, if you are watching this, we also have the podcast, and you can look in the links down below the video, and you will the description. You will have a multitude of links that we have available, different types of content. So